Hey guys, welcome to Bodacious. I'm Chef Nick. Today we're building the basics and we're making homemade meatloaf. So we have our ingredients laid out right here and we'll go ahead and get started, and you can do this at home. We have our ground beef, we have ground pork, we have breadcrumbs, we have milk and eggs, we have a little bit of Cajun season because we're going to do a Cajun style meatloaf, a bit of brown sugar, chili sauce, ketchup, salt, pepper, and this is going to be bacon wrapped. So after we form the loaf, we're going to go ahead and wrap it in bacon. So to go ahead and get started, one of the first things we want to do is soak our breadcrumbs into our egg and milk mixture. So first thing I'm going to do is whisk up these eggs, and we're going to add the milk. That is 1 cup of milk to the 2 eggs. And we're going to add the breadcrumbs. And what this is going to allow us to do is the breadcrumbs will soak into this milk and egg mixture and be a little bit more soft when we make our meatloaf. And we want to let these soak for maybe like about 10 minutes or at least 5 minutes. I prefer to use a panko breadcrumb because it's a little bit more coarse, whereas a fine breadcrumb doesn't absorb as much and you lose the density from the breadcrumb. I prefer the panko. The other thing we're going to do is mix up our meats. I prefer to use ground beef, which is a more popular version these days than anything else. So we have about 2 pounds of ground beef there, and that's an 80-20 ground beef, which means there's 20% fat. There's also 90-10 ground beef, which is 10% fat. I prefer in a meatloaf and a burger or in meatballs for there to be a little bit more fat content. In fact, I also like to add a little ground pork. Ground pork adds a bit of fat as well as flavor to your meatloaf. Now we have our eggs and our breadcrumbs over here soaking and our meat here. One thing that's super important with meatloaf is that we don't over mix it. So I do want to kind of mix the pork and the beef together a little bit. And this is just something you cannot do with a spoon or a whisk. You just have to get your hands dirty and get in there and really get after it. So I'm going to mix that up a little bit. And since we're doing a Cajun style here, I have a bit of Cajun seasoning. And we're going to add a couple tablespoons of that to the mix. Because we're adding that spice, I like to counterbalance that a bit with some brown sugar. So I'm going to add a little bit of brown sugar in the mix as well. Since the Cajun seasoning already has a bit of salt in it, I'm not going to get carried away with salt, but we always want to add a little bit of salt. And then pepper will add an additional layer of flavor to it. Now, once we have this here, we want to look at what else we're going to add. So if you're at home, the nice thing about meatloaf is you can really add anything. I love chili sauce in my meatloaf. It's not spicy. Chili sauce is basically like a very flavorful ketchup, a little bit sweet, a little bit spicy. And what I like to add to the meatloaf here is going to be a combination of about half a cup of chili sauce and a half a cup of ketchup is going right into the mix. If you're at home and you don't have chili sauce, another favorite of mine is barbecue sauce to add. It makes it really nice. And I'm going to mix that in a little bit as well. And again, I don't want to over mix, so I'm being careful. At this point, we have our breadcrumb mix. And you can see how it's soaked up, the milk and the eggs. And I'm going to add that in as well. And give it another mix. Just making sure that everything's incorporated, which it is. So rather than doing it in the loaf pan, I'm going to do it on a sheet pan. And the sheet pan is just covered with some aluminum foil because it keeps it from having to wash it as much afterwards. And we're going to form the loaf right on the sheet pan. The sheet pan advantage is that when we wrap it in bacon, you can't wrap it in bacon if it is in a loaf pan. So I'm going to take this meatloaf out, put it onto my pan. And I'm going to form it into the loaf shape that I want. You want to make sure that these little cracks all come out. You don't want there to be a lot of cracks in it because it'll fall apart when you cook it. So I'm just patting it down to get the cracks out, and then I'll reform it. This is adequate for 6 servings. And of course, if you want to make more, just double the recipe and you can feed 12 or have a lot of delicious leftovers. Once I form the meatloaf, what I like to do is make sure that the ends are pushed in, because I hate the little round part on the end. That's like a wasted piece. So if it's nice and flat, you get more servings out of it. Now, we have our meatloaf formed, and we have our combination of chili sauce and ketchup that we can add to the top. Just gonna whisk that together, and I can lay it on pretty liberally. I feel like the chili sauce really adds a layer of flavor and just like a little tanginess that's unexpected rather than just straight ketchup. Again, if you use barbecue sauce in your meatloaf, you can also just place the barbecue sauce on the outside. And the next step is that we're going to add our bacon strips. This is just regular bacon from the grocery store, but it is extra thick bacon because I think the extra thick just holds better onto the meatloaf rather than the thin sliced bacon. So we're just going to layer these on one at a time. It's okay if there's a little bit hanging under or on the pan, because I'll show you what to do with those as we proceed. This is a 12-ounce pack of bacon, and a 12-ounce pack of bacon hopefully fits this meatloaf perfectly. You know, there's like, some people put celery in their meatloaf, some people put onions. I've noticed that a lot of people just don't care for celery and onions, so I don't have them in my meatloaf. But if you do like those items, then you're welcome to add them in. So after it's like this, I'm just gonna push the bacon in on the bottom on both sides. And this is our bacon. And when we come back, we're gonna also do mashed potatoes with our meatloaf. So we're gonna move on to our potatoes, because you know, nothing works better with meatloaf than mashed potatoes. So we have some red skin potatoes over here. If you have time and you have water boiling, you can actually put potatoes into the water whole. If you're doing mashed potatoes, you don't have to worry about cutting them. But because we're in a little bit of a time crunch, we're going to cut the potatoes to be a little bit smaller, just so that they cook a little bit quicker. But if you cook the whole potato for an extended period of time, until they're really nice and soft and tender, it'll work just as well. So we're going to cut these into small pieces. One of the nicest compliments anybody I think can ever give a person is that they love your mashed potatoes, right? Because people have eaten so many types of mashed potatoes that it's a really nice compliment to receive, to say someone that they really like your mashed potatoes. So it's something I think is worth taking some time to do well and make from scratch and not use the instant. And hopefully I'll show you how easy it is to make them from scratch, so that we don't use instant potatoes at home anymore. All right, so once we get these potatoes all cut, they're going to go straight into the boiling water. Now, as far as the water goes, I feel like when we're cooking potatoes, it's just the same as pasta. You always want to have salted water that you cook your pasta in, and I feel that potatoes are not any different. So I'm going to salt the water. The idea is that the water should taste like salt water. And as it cooks the potatoes, then the potato will also absorb some of that salt. When we mash it, we won't have to add much salt at the end, just to taste. So we're going to add the potatoes into here. And we're going to bring this back up to a boil. Probably take about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we're going to add some milk. We're going to add some salt and pepper. We're going to add some butter, olive oil, and mash it up really well. So we have to give this a little bit of time to cook and get really tender and soft so we can mash it up. So we have our meatloaf in the oven, and we have boiled our potatoes for about 15 minutes. I went ahead and drained the water out of the potatoes and then placed the potatoes back into the pot. You can see how it is mashing very well. The reason that I like to use red skin potatoes when I make mashed potatoes is that because the skins are left on the potato and they end up in the mashed potatoes, it looks like it's homemade. So I'm going to add a little bit of milk to that, and I'm going to try to get it to where it starts to get a little more fluffy. And it's important to taste your food as you go, and I did taste these potatoes earlier and I felt like the salt content was more than adequate. So you can see how they're whipped. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper to add some more flavor. And we're going to finish it with butter olive oil. So instead of regular butter, the olive oil that we use here at Bodacious has a lot of health benefits. This is a crush of 3 different olives that gives it this butter flavor, and it's very healthy and delicious. So I'll add a little bit of the butter olive oil to flavor it up. A lot of our guests like to use the butter olive oil on their popcorn. They cook with it. It's one of our best selling brands of olive oil, so it's excellent. So here is our mashed potatoes, and they are complete. You can see how easy it was to mash it. Once the potatoes cook for an extended period of time and they get very soft, they're very easy to mash up. So our meatloaf should be about done. I'm going to pull that out of the oven. All right, and there's our completed meatloaf. So we have our meatloaf out of the oven. I went ahead and put it on a cutting board. Have a nice dinner plate out. I'm going to start with the plating of the mashed potatoes. You can see that they're nice and fluffy. I always like to make sure people get enough to eat. So we'll do a nice portion of potatoes there in the middle. And if we want, this will be nice, we'll put a little hole in the middle because I have some gravy that we can put on top. And it always looks nice if a little bit is coming out, cascading over the mashed potatoes. And then we'll take our meatloaf that we can present on our plate. So here's our meatloaf with the bacon wrap. Put that on the side of the potatoes. And I reserved a little bit of that chili sauce that we put into the meatloaf that we'll just let kind of come down onto the potato as well. All right, guys, so here is our mashed potatoes with gravy and our bacon wrapped meatloaf with chili sauce. I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you again very soon. We have a great time here at Bodacious, and hopefully you can come join us. Once again, this is Building the Basics, and I'm Chef Nick. Thank you.